bring in our first caller. And I say the first caller, he's the only one at the moment. So if you want to join us to raise any topic or question, please feel free to do so. But we're going to bring in Gary, who if I'm right, I think is also known as Inmendham on YouTube. Hi, Gary, how are you?
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I thought for Mother's Day, I would sort of broach the subject of motherhood, the experiment.
Is it Mother's Day? Oh no, I forgot the card.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh, man, you suck.
Yeah, so I thought I'd just bring up the subject of this idea that life, without God, the fact is we're stuck with unintelligent design, all right? There's no creative purpose, no agenda. I describe it as gladiator wars, 4 billion years of little DNA molecules fighting with each other. The swords come out, the big sharp teeth, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. The whole thing is basically a slaughterhouse. And I'm sorry. So what is the experiment that mothers conduct? They basically say, okay, I'm going to thrust a consciousness into this thing. All right. Now, if I went to the EPA and said, this is what my plan is, all right, I'd have to have an environmental impact statement. I'd have to explain what I attempt to prove or accomplish. I'd have to come to some standard and say, this is going to actually accomplish something. And my argument is all this anti-religion stuff is just fine to get rid of the gay bigotry and the other social nastiness of the religious suppression. But if you're just going to replace it with another fairy tale, I mean, you call it the Magic Sandwich Show, you could call it the Voodoo Economics Show, or you could call it the False Hope Show, or the I'm going to pretend I'm not going to die show, or I'm going to pretend I'm super attractive and marvelous show. I mean, humans are full of delusions, not only the God delusion, but the whole life purpose, Santa Claus, Merry Christmas, I love you, Mom delusion. I mean, their delusions are everywhere. And everybody, in my opinion, seems to be running from a truth that is, we are part of an unintelligent design that has basically created a carnage slaughterhouse. And you all seem fine with that. I mean,
I think we've discussed this before, I think, Gary, and I think your view was that it's almost irresponsible to have children. Is that an accurate?
Well, actually, I think it's in most cases criminal. I don't even think they give it a moment's thought. I don't think they think about what they're going to do if the kid comes out broken. I don't think they're going to think about their kid's actually going to die someday and how they're going to die. I don't think they think about divorces.
Gary, why do you eat when you might choke to death horribly doing it?
What do I eat?
Now, why do you bother eating when you might choke to death horribly while doing it?
Yeah, sorry. I might something horribly while doing it. I'm sorry.
No, what he was saying, and Thunder, I'll come back to that point if I may in a second. But just continuing with what I was addressing with you, Gary, if I may. I think this is something that I raised with you before when we were discussing this, that in a way you're right. And I think that it is... there is a lack of responsibility on many people who are bringing people into the world. I mean, the inability to look after them and having to rely on charity or state donations is just one example. But you're talking much more generally. And I think that I can see where you're coming from with that, because in a way, life is purposeless. But the problem is, isn't it, we are simply creatures of DNA, and it's built into the DNA to reproduce. And so I think that's the hurdle that has to be overcome.
But it's not. It's built into the DNA to have sex, okay? DNA's been gaming us, right?
And what's the purpose of having sex?
Well, I'm not talking about the purpose. I'm not talking about the end game. I'm talking about what our biology demands, okay? We get hungry and we get horny. We don't get horny to have kids. We get horny to have sex, okay? Because that takes care of the kid thing automatically. I mean, salmon don't swim upstream because they are thinking, I'm going to make a bunch of baby fish. That's not what they're thinking, okay? They're hungry to get upstream. They're not hungry to have kids. No animal procreates on purpose, and certainly we don't procreate on purpose in the sense that our biology doesn't say make babies. It says do the process that will cause babies. All
yes,
right?
I followed that. I'm going to go to Thunder, but just remind people, if you would like to comment on this topic or any other, send a contact request through Skype to Magic Sandwich Show, and we'll get you on. Thunder.
Well, fine, okay. So, what do you think the actual purpose of life is? Why do you do anything?
Well, what I'm doing is arguing for a minimization of the suffering. I value suffering. I say conscious animals, any sentient experience suffering has value. That's the creator.
Okay, I fundamentally disagree with you about the purpose of life.
Yeah, I that's what I'm sort of pointing out is that, yes, you're an atheist, I'm an atheist, and we fundamentally disagree on what life is, okay? Yeah, I think the only value in the universe is sentience. Feeling organisms create value. There is no value till one exists.
No, I mean, if you really wanted to actually sort of express it, it's a minimization on free energy parameter space. But in common parlance, yeah, okay. You might say that in the short term, the first order approximation is that people procreate because that's what they're good at. But also in that same parameter space, people discover things because that is a more favorable point on parameter space than not knowing how the universe functions. So in many ways, the actual thermodynamic purpose of life is to actually discover the purpose, is to actually create an adequate model of the universe.
Well, I'm all for an adequate model. My point is the model is basically a replicating DNA molecule completely out of control. It's like a universal forest fire or something. It's not a positive event. It's
no, but that's a minimization, right? There is a selective pressure on that, and the selective pressure is the gene sequences that are capable of most accurately modeling reality are the ones that survive the best, correct?
I'm not going to argue about genetic philosophy. I don't believe genetic philosophy.
This isn't philosophy. This is thermodynamics.
Can I finish one sentence? All right. I don't believe that philosophy is at all genetic. I don't think our intelligence, in terms of its actual physical structure, the logic and the information, has anything to do with genetics. It's called philosophy. It's not a biological function. It's a function of a thinking machine that biology gave us, okay? We run software programs that are made out of vocabulary and language, all right? That is our intelligence. The structure, the computer is sort of irrelevant to what we can think. We can think anything. Our biology does not own us. Our logic can own us.
Concordance, I think you want to make a point, and then we'll go to Aaron.
Well, I think Gary started making the point I was going to make, which is we are not just our biology. And in the same way that, you know, a colony is not just a bunch of ants. There's an emergent behavior. When we transition from simplistic behaviors to complex behaviors, there's a whole new level of meaning. And, you know, viewed strictly from a reductionist biological sense, we are vehicles for our genes, and that's specifically what Gary's talking about. We are reproducing machines to propagate certain combinations of genes that travel together. But we can also write out our genes. We can also benefit from this as the vehicle. We get to see a lot of cool things along the way. I'm not quite clear on whether Gary is actually views life this bleakly, or if this is leading up to some additional argument, but there's a lot more to it than just the biology. When you strip it down and you pull all the neurons out of your brain, you won't find joy or happiness or art or whatever in any of those neurons. It's the action of them together. It's our social behaviors. It's our complex higher order behaviors that emerge from the simpler biological aspects. Yeah, your genes have only one goal in mind, and that is to propagate themselves. We, on the most basic animal reductionist level, only have the goal of passing on our particular genetic markers. But on a much higher level, a behavior emerges from those simple behaviors that is all of art and literature and society and culture and helping each other and all those wonderful things that are worth living and dying for.
Gary, do you want to come back on that before we go to Aaron?
Yeah, just quickly. Yeah, I don't think they're that wonderful. Actually, I think most of it's just psychological babble and nonsense. It's just we're hungry. We manufacture our potato chip. We chase it in our little wheel, and we think we accomplish something. We just redundantly do this accomplishment thing over and over and over, chasing an ego gratification that is pretty superficial and meaningless. So yeah, and if you want to say, am I bleak? Yeah, I'm as bleak as you won't find a bleaker human being on this planet, because I think it's a zero-sum game, and I think life has been a preposterous fail. It's preposterously wasted the most
Gary,
valuable
let me just stop
Can
you
I
there.
just
Well,
finish?
no,
The most
thunder,
valuable
thunder.
commodity in the fucking universe. Sorry, didn't mean to say that. Okay, that's all. I just need 6 more words. Thank you.
Go on, Gary, finish your comment, and then we're going to go to Owen.
think
Then I'll
he
come
has
back to you,
done.
Thunder. Gary, finish what you were trying to say.
I was just the 6 more words. It's the most valuable thing in the universe, and an unintelligent design has squandered it preposterously because it doesn't have a brain and it doesn't know suffering matters, but suffering does matter.
Okay, Owen.
Yeah, in many of the conversations that I've had ever since I was a little kid over the whole purpose of life thing, what was the meaning of life, it always seemed like an empty question to me. It's like, you know how when they read tea leaves, I know I've said this many times on the show, you know, the gypsies read the tea leaves. Well, all they do is spill the tea leaves on the floor and then sit down and try to figure out what they mean. Well, life is pretty much the way Gary describes it. It's just kind of spilled on the floor. It's incidental. It's an occurrence. There's obviously no intent or purpose or plan behind it. It wasn't for any grand design. There's no ultimate goal in mind. And so the idea of saying what is the meaning of life is a meaningless question. There obviously isn't a meaning of life. And then where we get into philosophy is only how well you deal with that reality that there is no meaning of life. Now, what he's talking about, you know, the pointless pursuits that we follow to find meaning in our lives, however trivial or substantial they may be, that's all we've got. And one of the things about Buddhism, you know, when they do chasing down other religions and how they deal with this, I mean, the Buddhists have what would seem to be, by description, a very negative view of life in general, and yet their attitudes seem to be very positive. They are looking at things in much the way Gary is, and just coping with that emptiness.
I know Gary's
right.
itching to come back, and so I'm going to take Gary next. Because
I'm done. Go ahead.
Okay,
The
Gary.
Buddhists had to accept it because they had absolutely no control over anything. They didn't even have penicillin. I mean, Buddha had nothing. He had no way to fight nature, so he had to acquiesce to nature. Okay, but obviously they did basically recognize this is a slaughterhouse. This is insane. And they did religionize fire, and it was still a religion. It wasn't just a philosophy. But the point is I would argue that this is the job of philosophers, isn't just to be a pawn or be a bishop or be a knight or be a king. The job of philosophers is to understand the entire chessboard and understand you don't live your life just to be happy. You have to live your life in the context of the game you're playing in. You can't dump dioxin in somebody else's yard. You can't rape women. You can't do a lot of things because you are stealing too much value from the world for your gratification. We all can understand that that's what a philosopher does. He understands basic ethical equations and he draws those up. I'm saying the basic ethical equation, if we look at it, is there's no rescue mission here for the human race. It can accomplish absolutely nothing, and it's a high-risk game, a very high-risk game. There's
So I'm
huge
just pausing you there, Gary,
So,
if I may, just so I can understand your point.
Can I just finish it really quickly? So just imagine us, the human race, okay, as a fire engine running down the road at 100 miles an hour, and it's taking a risk of doing all kinds of damage. It's doing it very sloppily, and there's no fire. There's no damsel in distress. There's no rape to prevent, okay? It's a high risk. So if I build a nuclear plant under those conditions, you would say, what are you doing? You're not producing anything. Why are you exposing us to potential radiation? That would be my argument.
Yeah.
Is there,
And this is what I wanted to ask you about, because and even when you finish your comment, I'm still not following it. What do you mean by it's a high risk game?
well, the risk is the suffering. We all know that
Right.
a million people this year will commit suicide. A million. Okay, we don't even want to go into the numbers of people who have Alzheimer's disease, will have all kinds of other things that might make them say, "I regret ever being born." Jack Kevorkian said it. Mark Twain said it. We can go down the list of human beings who have made the statement, "I'd rather not have been," because I've seen too much, it's too ugly, it's too messy, it's too sloppy. We got a bunch of people laying, if there was a bird out there that existed that laid eggs on dog do, or laid eggs on branches, never built a nest, never did anything to provide for a future or guarantee a future, but just recklessly laid eggs wherever the heck it wanted to, okay, we would call it stupid. We would call that one jerky bird.
Well, we don't call the cuckoo that, and that's what you're
Well, the
describing.
cuckoo is even more malicious, so that's even more like a human being.
What's your
okay?
solution, Gary?
Somebody else's labor. My solution is just that this is a conversation that the human race needs to go back to having. They started having it 2,000 years ago, and the Christians and the religious nuts took over the philosophical conversation, and we stopped talking about the meaning of life. We stopped talking as Buddha did. We stopped talking like all the great Greek philosophers did about what exactly are we caught up in. And now we have all this evidence. We have evolution, we have DNA, we have all this understanding of how the universe functions, and now we have the evidence to actually make the argument that, guess what? This is insanely stupid. We just have a bunch of organisms chasing an ego gratification. It's a fake hunger for a fake cheese. We're running a wheel at a very high risk of creating preposterous amounts of suffering, and you will gain absolutely nothing. There's no point in making one of these. Why would you make one? Would you think it would be ethical to implant life on Mars, or to implant life on Pluto, or to implant life on Saturn?
Let me come
to you next, Thunder. I just want to clarify exactly what Gary's saying. Gary, we're going back to one of the first comments I made to you. Basically, you think that it is irresponsible of humans to have children because they inevitably are going to suffer.
Well, I think it's irresponsible to not have a very deep conversation about it first. I think that we should at least oblige people to show enough competence that they would show to drive a car or to do something else in society, to conduct the biological experiment that is creating a new human being and creating a sentient being that is going to suffer potentially. Yes, it's a significant fact that it may, in fact, not appreciate being born.
Right, but you're not saying it shouldn't be born. Just consideration.
If I personally could say it shouldn't be, yeah, that's right. I wouldn't. Right. I wouldn't let it happen.
Do you accept? Because it seems to be inevitable. You accept that all life, not just human life, all life involves suffering. So your solution would be effectively to end. Let me finish, Gary, please. Your solution, your ideal solution, would be to end all life, because that is the one guaranteed way of ending suffering.
Yes, it's called anti-natalism. Right. People have written books about it. Yes,
okay.
I think.
No, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, Gary, I just wanted to clarify that. Let's move back to Thunder.
I believe that we're at the point where this reaches the facile. But let's start with the tautology that successful patterns propagate successfully. And if you want to actually promote anti-natalism and not propagating genetics as the way that you think is the way forwards, then it's bloody obvious to a blind man that this is not a successful pattern. You don't need to know much about biology to realize that creatures that don't propagate become extinct.
We genetically inherit our philosophy, in other words. Okay, so a Christian has to be a Christian, a Muslim has to be a Muslim, a scientist has to be a scientist, because we inherit philosophy.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Well, you just basically said we inherit philosophy.
No, I said successful patterns propagate successfully.
Successful patterns. Patterns of what? I have a philosophy. My father
Genetics.
Let me answer that question.
Was not an anti-natalist. Okay, my entire family is not anti-natalist. I obviously have not followed some genetic pattern in being an anti-natalist. No, I followed an intellectual pattern.
Let me ask you this, Gary.
Can I jump in?
One at a time. We'll go to Thunder first, and then we'll come to Aaron.
How many societies in the world promote anti-natalism?
Do I care? Is it a popularity contest? I'm making a logical argument.
The reason that you don't have societies that promote anti-natalism
one at a time, please, Gary. Gary, you've had ample opportunity to put forward your case. Let Thunder respond.
The same reason that you don't find societies that have anti-natalism is the same reason that you don't have societies that like to put their heads in blenders.
Right. That's why we have a cutthroat capitalism, is because that's the right way to go, because it's going to be the most probable. Okay, it's the fact that using and abusing and raping is a successful strategy in the long run. So that's why we'll have more of it. More exploitation, because human beings can never be anything but their biology. They can never be anything but what they're born to.
I mean, we're going to go to Aaron next, please, Gary.
Facile argument.
Yeah. Okay, Gary. I think we've got the point. We're going to go to Aaron next.